What was the significance of the Tumu Crisis? The Tumu Crisis, also known as the Crisis of the Tumu Fortress or the Jisi Incident, was a border conflict that occurred between the Oirat Mongols and the Ming dynasty during July 1449. Little is written about the Oirats in Western society, also referred to as Oirds, Eluts and Eleuths. They were the westernmost of the Mongol groups of people with an ancestral home in what is today the Altai region of Siberia, Xinjiang and Western Mongolia. The Oirats were first made reference to in the 6th century and historically composed of 4 major tribes: Dzungar, Torghut, Dorbet and the Khoshut. In July 1449, the leader of the Oirat Mongols, Esen Taishi, launched a 3-pronged invasion of China. Despite having more than capable generals to lead his armies, Emperor Yingzong of Ming made the decision to personally lead those armies into battle against Esen. On the 1st of September, the Ming army were crushingly defeated by the much weaker Oirat Mongols, and to make the humiliation worse, the Ming emperor was also captured. This defeat has been recorded in history as one of the Ming dynasty's greatest military failures during the almost 3 centuries of the dynasty's existence. The defeat was mostly attributed to the poor leadership decisions made by the Ming army. Esen, for his part, was not fully prepared for the scale of victory he achieved or for the capture of Emperor Yingzong. He attempted to use his capture to raise a ransom while planning to capture the capital of Beijing. However, his plan was foiled by the leadership of the Ming dynasty's defense minister, Yu Xian, that remained behind in the capital. Yu quickly promoted the captured emperor's brother into the vacant role to become the Jingtai emperor. With no ransom, Yingzong was eventually released in 1450, but placed under house arrest by his brother, the now emperor. Esen himself faced growing criticism for his failure to exploit his victory, and was assassinated just a few years later in 1455. The military situation and background into this crisis. When the Yongle Emperor died in 1424, the defense of the northern borders of Ming China began to deteriorate. Despite the lack of resources and constant complaints from generals, no action was taken. Some reinforcements were conducted in 1435 and 1438, but overall the situation remained unchanged. There were a supposed 2.5 million soldiers in the Waiswar garrison system, but fewer than half that number were performing their defensive duties. Soldiers were often exploited by corrupt officers, and this resulted in poor standards of training, inadequate weapons and equipment. Soldiers stationed in the Beijing garrison were frequently used for construction projects such as the building of palaces, temples and private residences for officers and eunuchs of the imperial palace. The northern border was primarily focused on the area between China and the steppe, with outposts in what is today Inner Mongolia long abandoned. At that time, the Great Wall in its present form hadn't been constructed, and the northeast border was guarded by patrols from the 3 fortified cities of Xuanfu, Datong and Beijing, with the fortifications of Beijing not being completed until 1445. In Xianfu, there were 90,000 soldiers, with 35,000 of those ready for battle, the remainder in training. Datong had a force of 35,000 cavalry, which was supported by an army of 160,000 in Beijing, with additional forces stationed in reserve in North Zhili, Shandong and Henan. The border patrols were expected to hold off any enemy attacks until those reserve forces arrived, but with Xianfu located only 180 kilometers from Beijing, the defense system lacked any sufficient depth or a decisive response capability when under attack. Sino-Mongol relations. The Mongols were essentially divided into three separate groups: the Urankai, located in the southeast, the Eastern Mongols or Tatars in the east, and the Oirats in the west. In 1344, Urugtai, the leader of the Eastern Mongols, was defeated, and this left the Oirats in overall control of the Mongolian plateau. The chief of the Oirats, Torghut, also known as the Grand Marshal, strengthened their authority by having his daughter marry the young Khan, Togtoa Bukha, of the Eastern Mongols. Torghut died in 1440, and his son inherited the title of Taishi, or Grand Marshal, the de facto ruler of all Mongols. Esen was more ambitious than his father, and in 1443 and 1445 he launched attacks on the city of Hami, an important trading post on the route from China to Central Asia. It was not until 1448 that he was successful in claiming the city as his own. Esen also attempted to gain the support of the Mongol divisions within the Ming army in the western province of Gansu, while in the east his authority extended as far as the borders of what is today North Korea. However, to those authorities in Beijing, he was considered a threat, particularly by those that opposed the powerful eunuch Wang Zhen, who had great influence in the Ming imperial court of the 1440s. The Mongols were primarily interested in conducting free trade with China, primarily in the commodities of horses being exchanged for tea, silk, and other luxury goods. However, the Ming government then imposed restrictions and regulations on that free trade, limiting transactions to a few border towns, with Datong being the main trading hub. As Esen's power and influence grew, his dependence on those commodities was increased, as they were needed to maintain the loyalty of the Mongol tribes. This led to increasing numbers of Mongols being present in those border towns, with up to 2,000 new arrivals each year by the late 1440s. The large number of armed horsemen posed a security threat in the eyes of the Ming authorities. As a result, the imperial government protested against a number of incoming Mongols, which ultimately led to a breakdown in the relationship between the two trading factions. This culminated in 1449, when the Ming rejected the Mongols' request for goods and were only provided with a fifth of what they requested. This rejection led to the Mongols resorting to force. Crisis and Mongol invasion. In July 1449, Esen launched an invasion of northern China with attacks at three locations. Togtoa Bukha Khan and the Urankai attacked the Liaodong Peninsula in the east. The second attack was centered on the city of Xuanfu, and Esen led the third on Datong. The main objective of the attacks was to capture the fortified cities of Xuanfu and Datong. This would give the Mongols unrestricted access to the northern regions of China. By the 20th of July, news of the attack had reached Beijing, and the emperor ordered 4 generals to lead an army of 45,000 soldiers from the Beijing garrison to advance on the two cities under attack, as well as to protect the border. By July the 30th, the emperor learned that Esen had already attacked Datong, and Emperor Yingzong mobilized the remainder of the Beijing garrison. He also declared it his intention to personally lead a punitive force without first consulting his ministers. Emperor Yingzong was known for his love of military parades, and these were often organized for him by his influential eunuch Wang Zhen. Yingzong's self-confidence was further bolstered by recent Ming army successes in the Luchuan Pingmian campaign and in the suppressing the rebellion of Deng Maoqi. All previous Ming emperors, with the exception of the Jianwen emperor, had personally led armies into battle, and Wang Zun used this to support the decision of the Yingzong emperor. The first protests were from Kuang Ye, the Minister of War, and his deputy, Yu Qian. They believed that it was too risky for the emperor to embark on such a punitive venture. Other ministers attempted to dissuade the emperor from joining the campaign. The Minister of Personnel, Wang Zhe, wrote a memorandum stating it was the responsibility of officers to embark upon the dangers of war, and for the emperor as head of the imperial family, and thus the empire, to not be exposed to such danger. The emperor acknowledged the concern shown for his safety, but remained set on continuing with his intentions to lead the campaign. Esen's army defeated the poorly supplied Ming army from Datong at the Yanghe Pass on the 3rd of August. On the same day, Yingzong appointed his younger brother, Zhu Ziyi, to the Prince of Cheng, to oversee the administration of the capital during his absence, although any major decisions were to be postponed until the return of the emperor. Despite knowing of the security situation for some time, there was very little prior preparation, with soldiers only having a few days' notice of their departure. The emperor was accompanied by 20 experienced generals, most of whom held titles of nobility, with Wang Zhen acting as de facto commander-in-chief. The exact number of soldiers escorting the emperor is unknown. It was estimated to have been around 500,000, but in reality it could have been a significantly smaller total in number. Under optimal conditions, supplying such a large army would have been challenging. This army was hastily assembled, poorly supplied, and ultimately incompetently led. These conditions ultimately led to one thing: disastrous consequences. Ming counterattack. The Ming army departed from Beijing on the 5th of August, heading towards the Juyong Pass, with the objective being to make a swift and brief march westwards through Xuanfu before reaching Datong. The plan was to conduct a rapid campaign in the steppe before returning along a southern route to Beijing, passing through Yuzhou and the Zhejing Pass. From the outset, the army was in chaos and disarray, first by heavy rain, which meant they arrived in Xuanfu after 7 days, having been delayed by the relentless storm. Despite many pleas to turn back, first at Juyong Pass, then again at Xuanfu, Wang Zheng urged them to press on. By the 12th of August, discussions had taken place to have Wang Zheng assassinated and return the emperor to Beijing, but nobody had the courage or commitment to carry out the planned assassination. On the 16th of August, they passed the battlefield of Yanghe, still strewn with corpses, before arriving at Datong 2 days later. During this journey, more soldiers died of starvation due to poor supplies than from skirmishes with the enemy. Upon reaching Datong, Wang Zheng received news from local commanders and nearby garrisons that continuing the campaign into the steppe would be a dangerous undertaking. As a result of this news, the campaign was declared a success, and they began the return on the 20th of August. By this time, the discipline of the Ming army had already begun to deteriorate, and the return route would be along the same route as the outward one. On the 27th of August, the army arrived at Xuanfu. Just 3 days later, the rear columns were attacked and completely destroyed by a Mongol attack. The Mongol force then advanced to Yao'er Gorge, where they ambushed and destroyed the newly formed rear guard of 40,000 cavalry under the command of General Zhu Yong. The following day, the 31st of August, the Ming army set up camp at the Tumu post station, with Wang Zhen refusing to seek refuge in the nearby walled city of Huailai, just over 10 kilometers away. Wang Zhen's reluctance to move into the city was that he preferred to keep his baggage train with him. Remaining at Tumu also meant a shortage of water for both soldiers and horses. Tumu debacle. Esen dispatched his forces to block the Ming ancestral river located to the south of their camp. On the morning of September 1st, the Ming camp was surrounded and the Mongols, in an advantageous position, offered to negotiate. However, Wang Zheng ignored this solution and ordered his army to advance towards the river. In the confusion, a battle erupted between the disorganized Ming soldiers and elements of the Mongol army, with Esen himself choosing not to participate, merely to observe. Only 20,000 Mongols were involved in the battle, but that was enough to defeat the hungry and thirsty Ming soldiers, who were unable to offer much of a response, with nearly half their number lost, while significant numbers of weapons and equipment were seized by the Mongols. Among the Ming casualties were 2 dukes, 2 marquises, 5 counts, several generals, as well as hundreds of officials. Included in that number of deaths were notable figures such as General Zhang Fu and secretaries Cao Nai and Zhang Yi. Within the battle, the emperor's bodyguard attempted to remove him from danger, but were unable to achieve this. In the chaos, Wang Zhen was killed, possibly by one of his own officers. The emperor was captured and taken to a Mongol camp, where Esen decided not to kill his prized captive, but to inform the Ming government of his hostage. Immediate aftermath of the Tumu Crisis. The Empress Dowager Son and Empress Qian learned of the emperor's capture on the night of 2nd and 3rd of September and quickly sent gifts to Esen, hoping for the emperor's release. Panic was widespread throughout Beijing, as there were less than 100,000 soldiers to protect the city, and the fate of Datong and Xianfu was at that time unknown. Xu Cheng, known for his military skills and being familiar with the border situation, suggested moving the capital south as a temporary solution. However, Hu Ying opposed this idea, arguing that the tombs of the Yongle and Xuande emperors could not be abandoned. Yu Qian, also in favor of remaining, even threatened to execute anyone that further suggested it. Although the majority of residents remained once the situation had calmed, some officials still fled south, while others sent their families away for their safety. The Mongols approached the city of Xuanfu, demanding entry for the captured emperor and his entourage. In response, the defenders of the city fired on them, with the Mongols eventually retreating towards Datong. A message was sent to Beijing that the captured emperor requested supplies be provided for the Mongols, while the commanders at Datong also refused to open the city gates to the Mongols. On the 4th of September, Minister Wang Zhe requested to the Empress Dowager that the Prince of Cheng be promoted to govern the country. The Empress agreed to this proposal, but limited the authority as special and temporary. She also promoted Zhu Jianchen, the 2-year-old son of the captured emperor, to the position of Crown Prince. Yu Qian, the highest-ranking official of the Minister of War, oversaw defensive preparations for Beijing, ordering all stocks of grain to be transported into Beijing, as well as gathering military units from nearby provinces and the south to strengthen the city's defenses. Commanders in Datong were also ordered not to respond to requests from the captured emperor. Enthronement of a new emperor and the defense of Beijing. On the 15th of September, officials in Beijing urged the Prince of Cheng to assume the role of emperor in order to help stabilize the government while reducing the role of importance of the captured emperor in the hands of the Oirats. The prince, while initially hesitant, eventually agreed and ascended to the throne as the Jingtai emperor on either the 17th or 23rd of September. The exact date is unclear. Yu Qian, by this time having been promoted to the role of Minister of War, withdrew 80,000 soldiers from Xianfu in response to the threat of a Mongol invasion on Beijing. New commanders were appointed and defences better organized. Esen once again approached Datong, claiming he was defending Emperor Yingzong's right to the throne. His advance was halted at the garrison of Yanghe Pass. Esen then attempted to march on Beijing with the intention of restoring the emperor to the throne. Esen was halted once again at Jiling Pass for several days before finally reaching the vicinity of the capital on the 27th of October. With just 70,000 soldiers, Esen was easily outnumbered by the larger army of Yu Qian with 220,000 soldiers to defend the city. However, the fighting continued for 5 days before Esen accepted he did not have sufficient numbers to take the city. Esen returned to his homeland following this failure, and Ming soldiers were able to drive out any remaining Mongol forces inside China. Mongol unity then began to deteriorate as Yu Qian strengthened the defences of the passes while simultaneously clearing the border steppes of Mongols. Esen then offered to release the captured emperor, but the Jingtai emperor was hesitant to accept him as he wanted to solidify his position within the palace and government before agreeing to the return of his brother. This resulted in the Yingzong emperor being held captive for just over a year, and he was not released until September 1450. Upon his return, the Jingtai emperor felt threatened by his brother and ordered him to remain within the southern palace of the Forbidden City, thus limiting his contact with the outside world. Essentially, Emperor Yingzong found himself under house arrest. Consequences of the crisis. The Tumu Crisis sparked a major reorganization of Ming authority, in particular its military. This reorganization ultimately led to the relative stability of the Ming dynasty during the remainder of the 15th century. Although the initial impact of losing the battle and the capture of the emperor was at that time significant, the fortified cities were able to hold their ground against the Mongols and prevented them from permanently occupying any Chinese territory. After several months, relations between the two sides returned to their normal state. The Mongol aim was not to gain territory, but merely to establish positive trading relations with China. Esen's failure to make significant gains led to widespread criticism within Mongolia, eventually weakening his authority. In 1453, Esen declared himself Khan, but was murdered just 2 years later. That brings us to the end of this video, highlighting a historical era that has helped shape China today. If you've enjoyed watching and it's shown you a little detail of life and events here in China, then your subscribing to my channel would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching. Make sure you click on the link to the next video, and until the next time, goodbye for now.